Love You to Death, Stan Kraychik Mystery. Second in the series. Writer Grant Michaels, publisher St. Martin's Inn, New York, 1992. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 6. Down the Gardener Path. I got back to the shop around 10:30. Tobias wanted lunch already. True, he hadn't had much of a breakfast with me, but I wasn't hungry yet, at least for food. Last night's rich party fare was still sticking to my ribs and hips, but I was hungry for more facts related to the killing, and I wanted to warn Prentice Kingsley that the deadly truffle from last night had really been intended for him. If Laurette was telling the truth, then Prentice Kingsley was in mortal danger, and if she wasn't, well, I wanted to find that out too. So for the moment, I promised Tobias we'd have lunch sometime during our outing to the Gladys Gardner factory. In my mind, I'd already decided we'd eat on our way home from Candyland after my part of the mission was accomplished. We took a cab to the factory. For some reason, the driver assumed that Tobias and I were tourists, and he recommended that we stop in at the outlet store, which we could buy the famous Gladys Gardner chocolates at half price. My heart and tummy trembled at the opportunity, but my new dietary restrictions didn't allow such wantonness. Tobias, however, bounced up and down on the car seat, insisting that we go in, so only to appease him did I sacrifice my nutritional self-discipline. Besides, a bit of chocolate might satisfy him until later. After all, it worked for robust alpine skiers. The cab left us at the small store, which was half a block away from the factory's main entrance. The inside of the store reflected a half-hearted attempt to reproduce the romantic ideal of an old New England kitchen, a place that somebody's grandmother in colonial Vermont once cooked in. Supposedly, but the Formica pine tables and the plastic brick fireplace filled with empty cartons instead of a welcoming blaze provided insufficient ambiance to counter the grimy acoustic tile ceiling, the flickering fluorescent lights, and a dusty painted cement floor. Only the showcase glass sparkled amidst the general drabness of the place. And the air was heavy with chocolate, which, at the hour, was almost disturbing. It wasn't the pleasant kind of aroma that eased you into the day, the same way coffee and toast or fresh muffins do. Rather, the concentrated smell of chocolate was disquieting, almost sexual. The visit to the store would probably only re-energize Tobias rather than calm him, as I was hoping. The woman behind the counter might have been the model for the fake oil portrait of old Dame Gardner, or whoever she was, that hung high up behind the counter, strategically placed to be the visual focus of the store. It wasn't sweets these folks were selling so much as the ideal, the fond remembrance of a doting, loving grandmother figure in everyone's past, even if you never had one. You could pretend you did. I wondered if Dame Gladys would ever be modernized the way Betty Crocker had been, transformed into an urban superwoman, the kind who delegates the vacuuming while wearing pastel eyeshadow and stiletto pumps. Gladys's flesh and blood facsimile smiled at us benignly, but I sensed that her contrived courtesy began and ended at the threshold. During business hours and for customers only, she expected us to buy some candy, and to do it quickly. She stared at us for a while expectantly, and when we didn't order right away, she turned her back on us and knelt down behind the counter. I gazed longingly at the contents of the display case. One inner voice was saying, "Go on, you deserve it," while another one parried, "Straight to the hips, Lourdes." From behind the counter, I heard the sounds of heavy boxes being pushed and yanked and scraped along the gritty cement floor. After a few minutes, the woman rose back up again and faced me, a little flushed from her exertions. "Is there anything you want here?" she asked gruffly. Her look was cool and indifferent. Then suddenly it changed to absolute horror at the sight of something going on behind me. I turned around and saw Tobias reaching for a gigantic, red-flocked, heart-shaped candy box. The thing must have been 2 feet wide with 5 pounds of chocolate inside. He was pulling at it from the bottom where it rested on a display shelf. The woman yelled, "Don't touch that!" But the big box was already slipping from its lucite stand It all seemed to happen in slow motion, reminding me of those horrible school days of having to play softball during phys ed, when I was always assigned to the outfield, where whenever a batter swung and hit the ball, I would follow its airborne flight, then casually but methodically move myself away from its path. It didn't take the class bullies long to figure out my technique, so they'd purposely hit the ball toward my side of the field. Hell, it was a guaranteed base hit, if not a home run. I suppose in a way I was doing my part to cultivate their goodwill toward sissies. But the imminent threat of paying even half price for a 5-pound gift box of Valentine's chocolate spurred me on to more heroic feats. For a few seconds I imagined myself a professional ball player, whose life depended on this single catch. Creative visualization, it's called. Me, who's never once caught a ball. I dove and lunged and slid and, yes! Caught that baby with a nary a scuff on its fox velvet covering. Lying on the hard floor with the big heart safely in my grasp, I saw the film of my life resume its normal speed. I got up and replaced the box on the stand, then pushed it far back from the edge of the shelf. I did the same for all the other boxes within Tobias's reach. Curiosity killed the cat, said the woman with a warning tone. And almost killed half a day's tips, too, I added. Oblivious to the micro-crisis he just caused, Tobias remarked, I want some candy, Uncle Stan. The woman asked with sudden interest. He's your nephew. I nodded cautiously. Kind of. In that case, she said, I'm sure we have something for the little man. She'd switched back again from crabby shopkeeper to generous granny, a role that strained her limited acting talents. She handed Tobias a single piece of chocolate over the counter. He took it without a verbal response, so I prompted him. What did you say, Tobias? He studied the piece of chocolate without a word. I nudged him. Say thank you, Tobias. Instead, he poked his finger into the bottom of the candy when a pale orange-colored cream oozed out. Tobias said, I don't like this, and handed the goopy mess back to the woman. I want those, he demanded, pressing his now sticky fingers into the spotless glass of the counter showcase and pointing to an arrangement of dark chocolate caramels and then to a pyramid of solid chocolate cubes. I said meekly, I guess I'll take a quarter-pound of dark caramels. From behind the counter, the woman grabbed a handful of chocolates from her box, rather than upset the display case. Then instead of ringing up the sale on the register, she slapped the bag on the countertop. We don't want the boy to leave here disappointed, do we? She said, but her face had a look that meant, here's your hat, what's your hurry? I reached for my wallet, but the woman shook her head. You've got your chocolate, now have a nice day, she said brusquely and folded her hands together on top of the counter. The beneficent matriarch had changed back into a nasty nanny, whose patience we'd pushed too far. Tobias and I left the shop within seconds. He had the bag open and had jammed 4 of the chocolates into his mouth. His cheeks bulged like a greedy little hamster's. I snatched the bag away from him and said, No more for now. Chocolate wasn't the best thing for his empty stomach. I had him by the hand toward the factory entrance, 2 massive oak doors set under a huge granite archway a short distance from where we were. As we started walking toward the doorway, a gleaming lavender-colored delivery van appeared out of nowhere and screeched to a halt at the curb beside us. The side of the van was hand-painted with a vivid purple, irises arranged over the name Le Jardin Chocolatier, spelled out in elaborate cursive script. Even in midwinter, the van's lustrous paint seemed immune to road grime. The driver's window opened and a familiar head emerged. It was Rafik, the handsome French-Canadian man from last night's party. Stani, he called out with a broad smile. How did he know the diminutive form of my name? Only Nicky and my maternal grandmother could use it with impunity. Well, and perhaps Rafik now. What are you doing here? I asked with a happy hop in my nether regions. I am working. But don't you work for Le Jardin? It's all the same company. He pointed to the Gladys Gardner factory. It is? Oh, sure, but maybe now Le Jardin will close. You mean after last night? It's big scandal, no? Then gesturing toward Tobias, Rafik asked, Is this your boy? I shook my head. I like men, remember? Rafik shrugged. Many gay men have children. The proof that sexuality and logic are unrelated. Why are you coming here? He asked. I explained that I wanted to see Prentice Kingsley. In response, Rafik raised one eyebrow, much the way Nicky often does. Was it a Parisian hallmark? Rafik said, It's too bad, Mr. Kingsley, he is not here today. Damn, a wasted trip. Do you know where he is? I think maybe at his summer house. In the middle of winter? It's very beautiful there. Where? It's called Abigail, I think. Abigail, I said. Abigail by the sea? Rafik nodded, and he was right, too. It is very beautiful there. Then Rafik winked mischievously. Maybe you'd like to see how they make the chocolate now? I shrugged. Why not? We're here. I take you. But it's just down the street. Get in, he ordered. I opened the passenger door and shoved Tobias up onto the seat, then squeezed myself in behind him. Rafik slammed the accelerator to the floor, and we departed in the style of the best gangster tires squealing on the pavement. Where's the fire? I asked. No fire, he said with a grin. I like to drive. Rafik raced the van around to the back of the building and swerved sharply into the truck entrance. The sudden turn threw Tobias and me off balance and sent us tumbling toward Rafik. At the loading dock, he backed the van up, rubber tires squealing, and banged it against the rubber guardrail on the dock. Nothing like a hard-driving man, he told us to wait while he went inside to make arrangements for our tour of the factory. After a few minutes, he emerged from the building and galloped to the van. Is all set, he said energetically as he opened the van door. Go in there. He pointed the way through a doorway on the loading dock. Ask for Marie. Then he nodded. It's good you have the boy here. Looks okay to the boss. That devious logic had escaped me, but now I saw its value, especially when investigating at a chocolate factory. I silently thanked Nicole for insisting I bring Tobias along with me. Are you coming too? I asked. I have work, no? You can get back yourself. I nodded. I'm a big boy, Rafik. He replied with a wink. I hope so. I took Tobias by the hand and led him into the factory. Rafik waved goodbye and disappeared through another door. Once inside, I was struck by the honest industriousness of the factory. It was a place where things were made. Work was done, a contrast to the candy store where money and merchandise and lies were exchanged. The air inside was cool and carried a bitter, though not unpleasant smell. I'd expected something sweeter, but I'd later learned that I'd been anticipating the smell of sugar cooking rather than the pungent aroma of chocolate being tempered. I stood near the door with Tobias for a few minutes trying to get my bearings. I felt a little lost, and I'm sure it was obvious that we didn't belong there. A small electric-powered forklift, its chipped yellow paint streaked and speckled with chocolate, beeping at us and swerved too close as it buzzed by. I jumped back, pulling Tobias with me, and I saw the young driver smile self-contentedly at the success of his show-off scare tactics. Perhaps that was how he enlivened his dull life, pretending the forklift was a sports car or a skateboard. While we waited for the woman named Mary, who was supposed to take us on a tour of the plant, I looked around trying to guess what was going on. From where we stood, I could see through a large window 5 women of varied ethnic origins, none Caucasian, however, packing chocolates into boxes. They stood while they worked, and I was mesmerized by the blurred motion of their hands, guided by the same phantasmic force that inspires the best hair cutters. In their swift but deliberate work, a conveyor belt moved an interminable line of empty boxes, unhaltingly past each woman, while she urgently added her portion of candy to each box. It was the exact opposite of the famous skit where Lucille Ball picks chocolates off a conveyor belt in a growing frenzy. In real life, it's the boxes that move on the packing line, not the chocolates. I guess that the last woman in line had the most difficult job, fitting those final pieces into whatever space was left and doing it exactly within the allotted time. Perhaps she had some dubious title to reflect her talents, like Senior Last Packer. When our guide finally appeared, I recognized her instantly. It was Mary Finney, who'd been at the reception last night. Small and wry, trotting like a nervous animal, she approached us wearily, as though we were intruders on a top-secret project. "You are the ones here for the tour?" she demanded. I nodded and noticed her laminated name tag, which had her photo, obviously taken years ago, before the creepy skin and wattled neck had appeared, along with a number of low number, a kind of status symbol that implied a long term of dedicated service to the company. Mary Finney wore her employee badge proudly. "Who are you with?" she asked with a high, raspy bark. I felt compelled to correct her grammar, but restrained myself. She stood facing me, hands on her hips, defiant. "It's just we two," I answered. "You're supposed to be with a group." "We are the group," I said. She gave Tobias a disapproving glance and said, "Is he yours?" Tobias interjected proudly, "That's my Uncle Stan." Mary Finney's eyes bugged momentarily. "Why you people ever want to mix together, I'll never understand." "I'm his godfather." Mary Finney said nothing. Maybe it was the God word that shut her up. I could see it was going to be a challenge to keep my temper with this woman. But I reminded myself that I wanted to find out who had made the truffles for the party the other night. In particular, I wanted to know who'd made the 3 specially decorated ones. I could already tell I wasn't going to get too far with her. My first impression had been wrong. Mary Finney was no feisty terrier. She was a pugnacious pit bull. Already 5 yards ahead of us, she motioned for Tobias and me to follow her. "Come on," she yelled back at us, "and tell your boy to keep his hands in his pockets. These aren't free samples." I waved the small bag of chocolate we'd extorted from the outlet store owner earlier. "We came in with this," I said, holding up the bag, "so don't accuse us of pilfering." Went Mary Finney as she led us through a set of airtight doors into the factory. The air in there was cool, around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but still relatively warm for us. Since we'd come in from outside, we walked by racks of plastic jugs and looked exactly like a gallon-sized containers of automobile antifreeze. The labels said things like natural rum flavor and raspberry concentrate, but the list of chemicals that followed looked like antifreeze too. We continued walking toward a large open area. On the way, we passed by long rows of tall metal racks on wheels. All the shelves were empty, and I asked our grumpy guide why. "That was old Valentine's work. Went out months ago. We finished with Easter now." It sounded like the fashion industry, where everything behind the scenes is many months ahead of what the public buys, and in the big work area ahead of us, I found out exactly what behind the scenes meant. In the chocolate trade, the first noticeable change was that it was a few degrees warmer in there, although still not warm. Perhaps the change in temperature was caused by all the machinery in motion in that area, which resembled a sealed-down amusement park with belts and wheels and turntables and platforms all twisted, turning, tilting, and whirling. Thousands of chocolate objects. One extra nasty machine caught Tobias's attention. It resembled the revolving drum of a monstrous music box, but in place of dedicated pins plucking dulcet tones from a metal harp, the drum housed a collection of plastic molds, bunnies and ducks and chicks, impaled helplessly all around its surface. The rotation and revolution and vibration inflicted upon the poor chocolate creatures reminded me of the laboratory torture that astronauts must endure to overcome their sense of gravity. "What's that one for?" I asked Mary Finney. "Spinners," she barked back. "Keeps the chocolate, even in the mold. They're all automatic. Each one puts out 200 pieces an hour." It sounded impressive. Then we came upon a conveyor belt. carrying ranks and files of bleached white coconut creams on their fateful way into a mysterious machine. Just before entering the dark chamber, each row of creams was transferred to another conveyor belt, of course screening. As I peeked inside to watch, I felt Tobias tugging at my pants leg. "I want to see." I lifted him up and we looked inside the machine together. First, the conveyor belt dipped down into the shallow tuff of melted chocolate, which coated the bottom portion of each row of coconut candy. Then the quarry was dragged directly through a curtain of melted chocolate, which completely enrobed each piece. All excess chocolate ran off through the porous conveyor belt just as the chocolate-covered creams were transferred to another belt to be carried into a cooling tunnel. I caught hold of Tobias's little arm just as it was snaking its way into the dark chamber, eager to snare a freshly coated coconut egg. Mary Finney saw him and snapped, "I told you to keep his hands in his pocket." The next pieces we saw were specialty items for a local Roman Catholic's girls' school, part of next springtime's fundraising drive. According to the message on the wrappings, the items were solid milk chocolate crosses with a white chocolate Jesus attached. I asked, "Mary Finney, does this come with a white cross and a dark Jesus?" She didn't answer me. Against one wall, I noticed a row of large metal drums, like the ones crude oil comes in, with big black stenciled letters on each one spelled out, "Pure Candela." "What's that?" I asked. Mary Finney answered, "Wax." "For the floor?" "For the chocolate." "You put wax in the chocolate?" "You have to," she said, shaking her head in annoyance. It was obvious that she didn't enjoy conducting tours. I wondered why she did it at all. She explained about the wax. "You know how hard it is to make a good product? 1 or 2 degrees off and it gets dull and grainy. No sheen, no smoothness. You need a laboratory to do it right. You know how much that would cost? Well, with a little wax, you don't have to worry and you still get good product." "But you end up eating wax." "Don't even taste it. I'll bet it's a lot cheaper than coconut butter, too." Mary Finney was about to agree, but caught herself. Meanwhile, I wondered how much wax you need to make champagne truffles over a campfire. I was quickly learning that chocolate making could be just another heavy industry, one that occasionally produced an edible product. "Excuse me, Miss Finney, but I was wondering." "It's Mrs. Finney. My husband is dead." "Sorry," I said, then continued, "I'd like to see where the truffles are made." She set herself stiffly on her little legs and said, "Those aren't ours." "I thought Le Jardin made their truffles here." "They rent space and equipment, that's all." "I know the people who own the business," I said. "Then get them to show you around." "I just want to find out who made those truffles for last night's big party." She aimed her nasty little eyes at me. "Why?" "Because one of them was full of poison and it might have happened here." "I don't know anything about it," she said. "Don't you supervise all the work here?" "Who told you that?" "Laurette Cole." "Then why don't you ask her about it?" she asked with a snarl. "She's the one who made them." "No, she just arranged them. I want to know who made them." Mary Finney suddenly turned and faced me. "What are you doing here? If you're trying to help her, it's too late. She got all the special treatment she'll get from this place." "Who put the poison in that truffle?" The woman flinched. "I told you it was Laurette Cole. Her kind don't know any other way to fix the problems they got into. It figures she'd get caught, stupid woman." "That's my ma!" exclaimed Tobias, and in a second he was at her, punching and kicking with all his little strength. Mary Finney screamed loudly for help, then yelled at me, "Get that little bastard off me!" I didn't think good Irish Catholic women said things like that, but then I've lived a cloistered life. I pulled Tobias away from her, but I didn't use much strength. I wanted him to get in a few more good punches and kicks before I stopped him. Meanwhile, some of the factory workers had gathered around us, curious about the sudden outbreak of violence. I noticed that none of them offered to help Mary Finney either. They just stood by and watched as I disentangled Tobias from the older woman. Just then a man emerged from a glass-enclosed office that overlooked the entire production floor. I recognized him as John Lau, whom I'd also seen at the reception last night. Again, I sensed bear-like strength, not sluggish fat, under his economy-grade business suit. He approached the place where we were standing, the area where the hag had been mauled by the wild young boy. "John!" gasped Mary Finney. "Call the police! That boy attacked me!" The man said nothing for a moment, but quietly surveyed the situation with keen eyes. "There's no need for that, Mary," he said with the disinterest of a jungle judge. He rested his gaze on Tobias for a while, then he turned to me. "Seems to be the problem?" he asked calmly. His badge said Senior Vice President of Operations, and I wondered who he was when he wasn't wearing the badge. "I'm Stan Kraychik," I said. "This is Tobias Cole, my nephew. We were on a tour of the plant when this woman insulted Tobias's mother. She provoked him, and he reacted." "Liar!" exclaimed Mary Finney. "He attacked me." John Lowe addressed the crowd of workers who'd gathered around us. "Everything's under control now. Go back to your stations and resume your work." He gave orders comfortably, more easily than Branko did, without the brittle edge. Maybe John Lau was naturally better suited for supervising people. Or maybe being a cop required a constant level of repressed anger, something Branko had in abundance. John looked at the three of us. Mary Finney, Tobias, and me. Then he gently but firmly guided Tobias and me away to his glass-walled office. "Please wait here," he said, and left us alone inside the crystal cube. He went back out to talk with Mary Finney. Through the glass walls of his office, I watched them exchange words and gestures, but I couldn't hear a word. Mary Finney's mouth wouldn't stop moving, and sometimes her jaw flapped so hard that her whole head jumped and shook about in reaction. John Lowe stood quietly while she railed at him. Then he said something to her that stopped her mid-sentence. Just like that, she pressed her lips tightly together. Then she turned and walked away from him. I wondered what magic phrase he'd used on her, which psycho button he'd pressed to turn her off so easily. He headed back toward his office, where Tobias and I were waiting. When he entered, he lashed one brief, insincere smile at us. "Everything's been settled now. In a way of apology to both of you, I'd like to show you something that few people get to experience." He led us out of his office and away from the production floor to another part of the building, through doorways, up elevators, down crooked corridors, far removed from the chocolate-making machinery we'd just seen. We passed through a set of heavy doors, and I heard a strange, raucous crackling noise from somewhere within. When we pushed our way through a second set of heavy doors, we were at once immersed in the source of the sound, inside a long, narrow cavern that resembled a steamship's boiler room. But was sound the word for what was happening to our ears in there? Lined up along two sides of the dark chamber were 20 huge machines that looked like front-loaded clothes washers, but Paul Bunyan size. All 20 copper drums were rotating slowly, and they rattled as though they were full of pebbles, tons of them. The racket was horrible and actually painful. John Lowe handed Tobias and me some ear-shielding headsets to dampen the sound. We put them on and felt instant relief. Thus protected, we could walk past the 2 rows of machines. I lifted Tobias up so that he could look inside them, and what we both saw was jelly beans. There must have been thousands, no millions of them. Each giant machine was coating and glazing a single color of jelly bean. One copper drum contained red, another pink, then yellow, white, orange, green, purple. 20 colors in all, like a big set of crayons. Gosh, I thought, more wax. We departed from the other end of that long room, descended a few long flights of stairs, and eventually came into another cool area where more of the molded Easter items were being wrapped and packaged for storage before shipment. I said to John Lowe, "I was hoping to see where the La Jourdain truffles were made." He replied quickly but politely, "I'm afraid I don't have any more time today, but I can arrange for some samples to take with you now." Tobias said, "She told us no samples." "I can make exceptions," said John Lowe with authoritative confidence. From the shelves of Easter merchandise, he packed a huge chocolate rabbit and a large basket full of smaller items, bunnies, chicks, and eggs. "I'm sure it was all a mistake," he said. "Please accept my apology for the misunderstanding." Tobias took the chocolate goods and thanked him, but I added, We do not waive our right to lodge a formal complaint against that woman. She harassed this boy. Who knows the trauma she may have caused him? I doubt a little chocolate is going to set things straight. It's not so simple. Tobias poked me and said, "Shut up, Uncle Stan." "Good," said John Lowe. "The boy is sensible. I hope you were too." Then he escorted us to a nearby exit, and we were suddenly back outside, facing the parking lot of the Gladys Gardner Chocolate Company. "Come on, Tobias," I said, and tugged him over in the wet asphalt toward the MTA station where we'd catch the subway back downtown. He was already tearing into the basket of chocolate novelties. Here it was, not even Valentine's Day yet, and the boy was unwrapping foil-covered chocolate Easter eggs. I took one, bit into it, then spit it out. Shinola came to mind. While we waited on the platform for the train to arrive, Tobias asked me, "Is my ma dead too?" "Nothing like direct examination. No, Tobias," I replied. "Why do you think that?" "The way they talk about her." "I promise you she's all right, Tobias." "Can I see her?" "We'll go there soon." My answers must have satisfied him for the moment, because he stopped talking and focused on his query. He peeled off some of the cellophane wrapping from the chocolate bunny and munched contentedly on the ears. As for me, I was becoming mentally distracted by a confusion of questions and recent observations. My mind was beginning to resemble the convoluted candy-making machinery we'd just seen. When we got back to my place, I found out outside my door a big, flat, plain cardboard box, without identification. No words, no labels, no nothing. Nothing except the faint aroma of chocolate from inside. I took it into my apartment. Sugar Baby was waiting to greet me, but then scampered away at the sight of Tobias. Smart girl. She hadn't forgotten his recent terrorism that morning. I shook the mysterious box, but the heavy contents didn't move or make a sound. I sniffed at it again. Definitely chocolate, and possibly alcohol, too. Not a bomb, I thought, unless they're making them out of food these days. I opened the box and found inside a large velvet-covered heart. It was red velvet, finely snapped. Possibly even real silk. Not like the dusty fake flocking on the box Tobias had almost destroyed in the discount chocolate store area. I lifted the top of the heart and saw nestled inside 24 large chocolate truffles from La Jardin. Who'd sent them? Did I finally have a secret admirer? Or was someone perhaps wooing me with poisoned delicacies? I called Nicole at Snips and tried to convince her to watch over Tobias while I went to see Lieutenant Branco. I wanted to bring him up to date on what I'd found out and on what had just appeared on my doorstep. But Nicole refused to help me, so before bundling Tobias up again to face the great outdoors with me, I made some tea, cocoa for Tobias, to prepare us for another wintry foray. It was then that I heard strange sounds coming from the living room. I looked in to see Tobias sitting on the sofa, gagging and coughing, with melted chocolate all around his mouth. He began to cry, too, when his little body went into quick, jumpy spasms. My first panic-stricken thought was that he'd eaten a truffle from the mysterious box that had just arrived. Had he accidentally poisoned himself? Then just as quickly I realized that what he'd actually eaten was almost an entire 2-pound chocolate bunny on an empty stomach, and now was about to upchuck the near-toxic product. I grabbed him up into my arms and made a run for the toilet with him, trying all the way to keep his mouth covered, trying to keep the warm, melted, waxy brown slime from dribbling onto the recently shampooed Abusin carpet. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.